It's truly a strange time for the world. You have a lot more time to watch movies now, I assume. So, I'm going to give you a rundown of my top 15 films from last year. Let's get started.
You're being so much like your father.
Do not compare me to my father.
More like Divorce Story, am I right? Alright, Noah Baumbach, we've seen plenty of movies about failing relationships and even more about struggling actors, writers, and filmmakers trying to make a fulfilling life for themselves. Fortunately, I was able to overlook the thematic navel gaze-a-thon, and in doing so was actually deeply moved. Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson turn in what might be career-defining performances for both of them. What could have been simply another anti-romance divorce sucks bicker contest manages to pull through a handful of incredibly memorable scenes, including a surprising singing performance from Driver that packs a strange emotional punch.
There's a war going on out there, and you welcome this into our home?
A Tinder date goes awry when two young black acquaintances are pulled over by a racist cop. And then let's just say, things escalate. Guns are involved, people get hurt, you know the drill. Memorable characters, confident pacing, and strong writing carry this action thriller, which remains gripping from beginning to end. Some have called this the Black Bonnie and Clyde, and I can see why, though I actually might think this film is, dare I say, superior to the Arthur Penn classic. Perhaps it isn't breaking any significant molds, but it's a worthwhile tale both as popcorn entertainment and social commentary.
I know for a fact that the villain of the story, he only wore white.
Prior to this film, I had no idea who Dag Hammarskjöld was, and that's likely due to my age. Talking to one of my Swedish relatives, however, enlightened me to the fact that 60 years ago he was one of the most important men in the world. The Swedish diplomat and UN Secretary General died swiftly and mysteriously in a plane crash in 1961. Filmmaker Mads Brugger brings his eccentric personality to the forefront of this investigative documentary as he attempts to uncover the truth of what happened, which, he readily admits, could just be a conspiracy theory. Brugger discovers a series of information leading him to believe that Hammarskjöld was on his way to uncovering a massive plot by a white supremacist organization in South Africa to spread the AIDS virus to black residents. Brugger's unique approach to this documentary includes long sections of him filming himself and a hired assistant, trying to ascertain how he wants to structure the film itself, and what information is most valuable to the case. This gives the film a slight Charlie Kaufman-esque vibe, yet it manages to never really feel meandering. Whether or not the subject's claims are entirely trustworthy is up for debate, but this film makes a strong case that at the very least these theories should be taken seriously.
All these numbers, you see that it's just up, and that's all crime.
If you commit a crime on my watch, you're going to jail. Forever. That's the community we want to create.
Mr. America is a mockumentary that requires, frankly, quite a lot of context to fully appreciate. Alt comedians Tim Heidecker and Greg Turkington have crafted one of the greatest things on the internet with their fake movie review show turned political satire On Cinema at the Cinema. Mr. America follows Tim Heidecker's fictional version of himself running for San Bernardino District Attorney simply as a move to spite the attorney that prosecuted him in a, again, fictional murder trial. Despite being an extension of this other universe, Mr. America is crafted as a standalone tale in a minimalist setting. It was shot literally in 3 days, and in many ways mirrors This Is Spinal Tap, the film that essentially invented the mockumentary as we know it. Admittedly, I'm a bit biased as an on-cinema head, but in my opinion, this is just another testament to the comic genius of Tim Heidecker. However, if you're not initiated, I strongly suggest you check out On Cinema first. You can blow through an entire season in about an hour or less, but the now 11-season arc gets more rewarding the further you go. Taking place almost entirely on a Colombian mountaintop, Manos tells the tale of a group of teenage commandos who have been handed the task of supervising a female POW whom they only know as Doctora. This is the kind of tale that draws immediate comparisons to Lord of the Flies, but goes in a completely different direction, eventually leading to a believable yet thrilling climax. The filmmaking itself is very naturalistic yet controlled, and the locale alone makes one feel immersed in an almost apocalyptic atmosphere. Even though Manos was universally lauded by critics, it seems to have flown quite a bit under the radar. But alas, such also seems to be the case with several other films on this list. Easily the most original animated story I've seen in a while, I Lost My Body is a French film that tells two parallel stories. One about a dismembered anthropomorphic hand attempting to find its way back to its lost owner, and the other, a young delivery man falling for a woman in what seems like a tale of unrequited love. The two stories do connect, and you can probably guess how, but this film is anything but predictable. It's tragic, romantic, and depending on how you look at it, it's either bleak or bittersweet. But I found it to be a welcome departure from the Disney/family animation machine. Though I definitely like and appreciate a lot of those films, this offers something much more poetic and nuanced than I think a lot of what you see from Hollywood these days.
Check out this guy.
When I was a little boy and told people I was going to be a comedian, everyone laughed at me. Well, no one's laughing now.
You can say that again, pal.
Well, this seems to be the most divisive film to come out last year. Some have criticized Joker's stark nihilism and have accused it of wallowing in or even celebrating the misanthropic character in his origin story. In the technical sense, others have criticized the story or the fact that this is not just influenced by the films of Martin Scorsese, but rather explicitly ripping them off and bastardizing them. I can understand some of these criticisms, and in a way I will concede that Joker is in no way on par with Taxi Driver or The King of Comedy. However, I was surprised at the things this film made me feel. The craftsmanship was impeccable, and Joaquin Phoenix's performance was thoroughly haunting. But furthermore, as a deconstruction piece, I saw this film as an attempt to have society, specifically American society, look at itself in the mirror long and hard, and see what happens when you fail the needy on every level imaginable. In the Batman universe, there are literal beasts, but the Joker has always been the most monstrous of all, and we see him as Batman's shadow, but here without all of the tragedy that lets us feel for Bruce Wayne. This story, unapologetically, makes us question why we worship some and demonize others. Some say it does so in a shallow way, but given how tragically human it all felt to me, I simply disagree. In Christopher Nolan's Batverse, we are asked to examine a world where Batman is possible. But what Joker shows us is that the world the Joker inhabits is already here.
If our leaders, if they're evil, what does one do?
You have a duty to the fatherland. The church tells you so.
A Hidden Life follows the true story of Franz Jägerstätter, an Austrian farmer and devout Catholic who refused to fight for the Nazis. It unpacks the struggles of his family and home village as they all toil through the consequences of his refusal. To be honest, I have a bit of World War II film fatigue at this point, but I felt obligated to indulge because it's Terrence Malick. Malick is unmistakably one of the most visionary directors in the history of cinema, and in very Kubrickian fashion, for most of his career he has averaged 1 to 2 films per decade. But since A Tree of Life, Malick has seemed to put himself into a mode of rolling out a film every couple years. Unfortunately, every movie I've seen of his since then has struck me as some shade of Tree of Life light and felt mostly vapid and style over substance to me. We get it, Terry, you love whispery voiceovers and floating Steadicam shots. However, in this instance, Terry plays to his strengths. He's able to capture powerful, subtle moments in a way that makes them feel as though they are impressionistic microcosms of the universe's beauty, while still remaining relevant to the immediate plot. Also, as it turns out, this is more a film about faith and morality than it is about war. A Hidden Life feels like a return to form for Malick, and reminds me of why his transcendental style penetrates so many of our souls.
What's a timberman want with being a wiki?
Just looking to earn a living, just like any man.
So you got these two lighthouse keepers who are kind of going insane. The universe is slippery, you're not always entirely sure what's real, so whatever's happening, the payoff better be worth it. And yes, for my money, this film is thoroughly satisfying on so many levels while retaining a sort of mental queasiness appropriately akin to being lost at sea. The Lighthouse strikes a tone all its own between the incredibly polished black and white cinematography, the wildly eccentric performances from both William Dafoe and Robert Pattinson, which include time and region appropriate dialogue, something Robert Eggers' previous film, The Witch, also did incredibly well. This is one of those genre-bending films that's difficult to classify as it straddles a line between dark comedy and surrealist horror. It's an experience that manages to be both difficult to witness and impossible to look away from. I've heard some compare it to Kubrick's The Shining, and though my gut reaction wants to call it just a Guy Madden film that's less blurry, perhaps it's not a far cry from stimulating the imagination in a similar vein as that. I'm sure there are already countless YouTube videos attempting to pick apart the meaning of the ending, so I won't even hint at what I think, but I believe there's a lot to unpack there.
I invited Danny to come to Sweden.
You know what she's been going through.
Christian says you've got this special week planned.
As somebody who's the same age as Ari Aster, I gotta say, I'm incredibly jealous that he's already crafted 2 genre-defining masterpieces in a row. A group of friends goes on a trip to witness a centennial ritual from a commune in northern Sweden. As you can already ascertain from this film being in the folk horror genre, not everything goes smoothly. But the real crux of the story lies much deeper. Ari Aster said he wrote this film as a breakup story after a difficult separation from his previous partner. Having that context, you can definitely feel that in the rawness of the main character's struggle through a series of traumatic events that set the stage very early in the film. Midsummer is an incredible film ripe with so many layers of feeling that go into a wildly visceral representation of every deep struggle. As a cinematic entity, it's afraid, it's angry, it's disgusted, it's jealous. But without spoiling anything, in the end, it discovers a sense of satisfaction.
Enjoy it. And cut!
You know, I've always felt kind of left out because I have mixed feelings about Quentin Tarantino. There's no denying that he's an incredible storyteller and filmmaker, but sometimes we gotta put up with some obnoxiously unsavory characters and overly gratuitous violence. Personally, I find it a little grating sometimes. Yet, I've always felt a bit of a kinship with the guy on some level. He's clearly a cinema nerd and loves to let all sorts of classic references bleed through his stories. And oh boy, this film is a reference machine. As somebody who also has an obsessive interest in true crime, I was fascinated when I heard that Tarantino was making a Charles Manson film. But in very classic QT style, that was just a hook to get the viewer interested so he could throw you something totally different, since actually, Charles Manson is barely even a character in the film. Much like Inglourious Basterds, this is a film that revels in its flavor of revisionist history. The two main characters, though influenced by real people, are fictional, but the entire film revolves around the concept of what an impact a single added character, or two, could make to an entire sequence of tragic historical events. In doing so, Tarantino indulges himself, and you can feel how much fun he's having the entire time making this film. I had a blast, and I wouldn't be mad if Tarantino exclusively stuck to this subgenre he has made into his own. Also, I gotta say, that was one hell of a climax.
No has sido un buen hijo, hijo mío.
No.
Pedro Almodóvar is instinctively the first name I think of whenever I hear the words Spanish film. In my mind, this one man's body of work has defined an entire country's style of cinema. Though I've only seen a handful of his films, I've never been disappointed in any of them to say the least. His films have so much honesty, heart, and color, both visually and character-wise. Pain and Glory is undoubtedly his most personal film and appears to be somewhat biographical. Antonio Banderas plays his avatar, a self-pitying filmmaker who begins to revert to stories from his troubled childhood to make sense of the suffering he now experiences, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. It's a story that packs a punch, but it's definitely the least bombastic and most tender film of his I've seen. Every piece of the story unfolds with great care, and it all surmounts to an incredibly poetic reveal in its final shot that will most definitely seal the deal for any doubters of its greatness.
I don't want to be like one of those girls, you know? The baby.
A lot of people have been giving me shit for not seeing 1917, but my response has always been, you know, I've already seen a film this year that was filmed to look like it was done almost entirely in a single shot, and I can almost guarantee you I like it more. I'm not meaning to throw shade at 1917, I'm sure I'll enjoy it when I watch it. But this film, I saw at AFI Fest 2019 going in cold with no context, and I was thrown for a loop at how utterly simple but world-shakingly powerful it was. It's a story of two women, one of whom encounters the other on a street who appears to be trying to flee from a domestic abuse situation. The rest of the film unfolds like you're standing or sitting right there next to these two women every step of the way, and each moment brings to light the beauty of both of these characters and how they begin to develop a bond based largely on their shared heritage. Sometimes the simplest films can be the best. I'm sure this was in no way an easy film to pull off, but its strategic use of limited cuts and locations gives it an incredibly human touch that's difficult not to fall in love with.
How old are you, Moses?
I'm 20.
16.
20. I'm 23.
There's really nothing like the distinct off-color flair that great Aussie filmmakers bring to the medium. There are so many incredible things about this film, but its most striking feature is its ability to balance incredibly dark subject matter with a lively, bright tone. It's about a teenager with an unnamed terminal illness who falls in love with a small-time drug dealer. Though it's obvious that Milla's parents don't fully approve of Moses, for obvious reasons, they temper the situation with as much grace as they can, since they also seem to fancy themselves as free spirits. Baby Teeth might be the best tragic comedy I can think of. It almost feels like the cinematic equivalent of a birthday, since the whole film is basically a celebration of life. It'll make you laugh, and it'll make you cry. That's a cliche, but honestly, it's really true. There are some really brutal and tragic moments indeed, but the charm in the end is what will win you over.
Je
This is one I had been hearing hype about for several months prior to seeing, and to be honest, I was skeptical of it living up to such expectations. But needless to say, by the placing on this list, those expectations were blown away. The 1700s French period romance follows Marianne, a painter commissioned to do a wedding portrait of a young woman named Eloise. The big kicker here, though, is that Eloise refuses to be painted, so Marianne has to do so without her knowing. This is mostly a quiet story, but its luscious visuals, sublime performances, strong writing, and its reliance on very subtle plot devices and a series of powerful key character moments elevate it to being, quite frankly, a masterpiece. Portrait of Lady on Fire has what I find to be that kind of rare movie magic, a kind of almost mystical power that makes it difficult to explain to people why it's so incredible. Frankly, words are incapable of articulating its greatness. The more I say about it, the more I feel like I will cheapen the experience for the viewer, so just go watch it. Cold takes. Scorsese is one of my all-time favorite directors, but his mob films, for some reason, tend to kind of bore me. I feel very disconnected from them. I can't deny the greatness of Goodfellas on every technical level, but something about it always felt a bit hollow to me. When it comes to gangster films, I feel a strong soul connection with certain classics like Godfather 1 and 2, Once Upon a Time in America, and in every way, I feel like The Sopranos, though not a film, is the pinnacle of the American gangster story. Now, asterisk, Scorsese's mob films have grown on me over the years a bit after rewatches, so I'm sure I'll probably warm up to this one a bit more on repeat viewings. But I guess I just have to admit that it's not my genre. Holy hell, did this get a lot of shit from pretty much everybody. But I had fun. Maybe this is that sort of outsider feeling that prequel defenders have, but despite some strange plot holes which I think can be danced around without insulting my intelligence too much, I thought it was a satisfying conclusion to the saga. I love trash cinema, and Fred Durst's disaster piece, yeah, I said Fred Durst from Limp Bizkit, about a mentally challenged, emotionally unstable adult fanboy stalking his idol is a piece of glorious entertainment to behold, and one that you definitely should watch, which definitely does not fit into the category of good. This is probably the most disappointing film of last year. Admittedly, I'm not a huge fan of the Stephen King novel either, but a lot of the early press generated outrageous hype which I fell prey to. And let's be honest, I don't think anybody ever has or ever will successfully pull off a sequel to a Stanley Kubrick film. It's not terrible, there are some creepy, disturbing sequences, and the story itself isn't bad, but you can just feel how much this film is begging to live in the shadow of its predecessor. It just doesn't have the same life or power, and ultimately it just feels a bit awkward and unnatural. Just stick with The Shining. It's good, fantastic ensemble cast, but man, I really don't think it needed to be non-linear. I believe that classics are sometimes told in exactly the sequence they should be the first time. Greta, you're so very talented, but no need to mementoize this if you ask me. Here's The Big Boy, the film that shattered the Oscars. First time a foreign language film has ever won Best Picture. And far too late if you ask me. As for the film itself, it's an enjoyable flick. The political commentary is effective and subtle enough, until the final 10 minutes. What I thought was a pretty great film up until that point got a little ham-fisted for me by the end. Frankly, Bong Joon-ho has never been my favorite director of disturbing South Korean films. I tend to prefer Chan-wook Park and Kim Ki-duk. Still, despite how mixed I felt with the overall result and the fact that a couple other films I felt were more worthy of Best Picture, I'm very glad that it won Best Picture. I mean, this really opens up doors for international cinema, and I think it has the potential to give people uninitiated with non-English speaking films a whole new world to discover. Perhaps I'm becoming an increasingly morose person. It seems like my list is overpopulated with the violent, the macabre, tragic, and heavy. The one animated film I have on here is about a dismembered hand looking for its lost body, and the most fun film I have on here is the one that covers the Manson murders. I can't exactly explain why this is, but I do know that even though these films explore some really dark things about humanity, I think they do so in a way that really gets me to empathize and understand a lot about humanity in general. With what's going on in the world right now, especially right now, I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I'm sure you all will notice a huge uptick in the amount of art that you consume during this time. A lot of it, I bet, is distractionary, but I hope you're feeding your intellect and your soul as well. I hope you all stay tuned. I'm looking forward to bringing you all some film talk in the near future, so please like and subscribe. Now, get out.
Hey everyone, welcome to my channel where I can talk all about the movies that I loved this last year. I'm sure you have so much time because you're in quarantine, and if you're not home and you're supposed to be, then you're gonna be in big trouble. Leave me alone, I'm bored, please.
Sorry, I don't know what she's doing.